On February 28th of 1995, a young girl was reported missing after her father went into her bedroom and found blood everywhere. Nearly 2 months later, her body was found, and what happened to her was absolutely awful. This is the case of Regina Krieger. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also being a lead expert in the field of science. So if we add this inside of this, and then just so happen to add this inside of that, well, we get... But today, we're looking at the case of Regina Krieger and what happened to her. You're going to learn about an evil man who should have been charged a long, long time ago. For our story, we're heading to Twin Falls, Idaho. Now, in 1995, the population was approximately 31,740 people. It's since doubled that and more, with exactly 66,989 people as of 2021. If the area is growing, quite frankly, it must be a pretty good place to live. Twin Falls City was founded in 1904 as a planned community, though thought of before that and officially incorporated on April 12th of 1905. If you ever happen to find yourself in the area nowadays, there's certainly not a shortage of things to do. You could take a trip to Shoshone Falls, which has some beautiful waterfalls. If you wanted to, you could go to the Harrod Center for Arts and Science. It's free to enter, though donations are requested. If you feel like having the wind flow through your elegant hair, then the Snake River Canyon Rim Trail might be for you. Over 10 miles of developed trails for you to walk, hike, and bike. If you wanted to, you could also go kayaking, a heaping load of fun. But unfortunately, none of these wonderful options are the reason as to why we're in Twin Falls, Idaho today. Though Snake River does come up in our story, just a heads up. Regina Lee Krieger, or Gina as she liked to go by, was born on March 3rd of 1980 to Rhonda Freeman and Daniel Krieger. When she was a small child, she was very loving to everybody. She was always filled with a smile, full of inspiration, kind, and enjoyed being around her friends. Gina had one brother named Clifton, and they got along pretty well. She enjoyed music, water skiing. She was actually on the Murtaugh Lake Water Skiing Club. She was a member of the Lutheran Church and the Zion Lutheran Youth Group. By the time that she got to her teenage years, things started to get a bit messy in her life. In June of 1994, her parents got a divorce, and Gina took it really hard. They split houses, and things were only going to get more complicated. In September of 1994, Regina decided that she wanted to live with her father, Dan. And her mother, Rhonda, really didn't want that. They had a lot of arguments about this. Rhonda eventually agreed to letting her live with her father as long as she didn't do anything wrong. Rhonda actually made a list of things for Gina to follow, and if she messed up, she was moving right back with her mother. Gina agreed to this, and between September to November, she was doing really well and following the rules. In December of 1994, however, things really started to change a bit. Gina's daily habits, her sleeping habits, and her appearance changed, and she just started to act different. The reason for this is because she began to do, which, for the sake of keeping this video monetized, I will now refer to as bugs. And her parents immediately picked up on this. So in January of 1995, both Dan and Rhonda had a talk with Gina, trying to figure out where and who she's getting the bugs from. Gina was 14 years old at the time, attending Burley Junior High School in the 9th grade. She had just started hanging around a new group of friends, and they weren't good influences in the slightest. This group of friends introduced Gina to or at 14 years old, she got hooked on the stuff because of these people and her wanting to escape from reality. Well, anyways, when Gina's parents had their talk with her in January, once again, they wanted to know who it was that was giving her the bugs. She wasn't buying them. Somebody was giving them to her. She didn't have that kind of money or money at all. She didn't have a job. Gina didn't want to tell her parents, and she told them she had to keep it a secret until she would inevitably move back to her mother's house. Eventually, however, Gina decided to quit doing bugs and hanging out with her so-called friends. In January of 1995, she then attempted to take her own life but was unsuccessful. At her school, and a hospital too, Gina was going to counseling for the divorce between her parents, bugs, and other issues. Her counselor at Burley Junior High School was named Bev Clark, and the two of them got along very well. Gina felt like she could tell Bev a lot and didn't hold back very much. By February of 1995, she told Bev that she was probably going to drop out because her grades were bad, and she had poor attendance that was going to cost her her credits. Gina received a letter from her school warning her that she had exceeded 9 absences and was in danger of losing credit for the term, aka she was going to be held back. When she talked to her counselor, Bev, on February 27th of 1995, she said that she wanted to quit school and get a job rather than flunk out. Bev and other school officials assured her that if she attended her classes and received passing grades, she would earn her credit. This particular day was a pretty good day for Gina, as she felt she was getting back on the right track. Later in the day, by nighttime, she had gone home to her father's house that she also shared with her brother. She called her mother, and I'm not sure what was said, but Gina called her mother by her first name, or Rhonda. Rhonda was obviously taken back by this, and it made her feel weird. Now, at Gina's father's house, her bedroom was located in the basement, and so the sound between the top floor and the bottom was muffled and hard to hear. Her brother and father both lived on the second floor. During this night, at around 10:45 p.m., Dan, Regina's father, and her discussed some family matters, and then they both went to bed, and he saw her for the last time. By the next morning, or February 28th of 1995, Clifton, Gina's brother, had went downstairs and found a trail of blood and his sister missing 2 days before her 15th birthday. Immediately, he went upstairs and told his father, Dan, and Dan went into a state of shock. Clifton then started calling everyone, including the cops, his mom, and his grandparents. The police immediately started what would be a 24-year-long botched investigation. From the time they started, they didn't collect enough evidence, specifically DNA, and overall did a poor job. Along with Gina missing, whoever had taken her had also taken a double-edged knife, her green and black blanket, and a martial arts sword called a sai, and there were 0 signs of a forced entry. The police started questioning Gina's friends and family, specifically her father and brother at first. Dan, her father, ended up taking a polygraph test, asking him about the situation and if he had anything to do with it, and he passed it with flying colors, but was still a prime suspect. At first, investigators believed Gina to be either a runaway or a victim of and that they found no signs of foul play. There was a trail of blood, and it wasn't a small amount. Plus, all of the missing objects, it was obvious that someone took Gina. Like, what on earth was this police department doing? Another piece of evidence that was found and kind of used was Gina's diary. In it, she details her life and how she felt, but she also wrote about her secret boyfriend. His name was Isidro, and he was described as being Hispanic, between 16 to 25 years old. He potentially could have lived in Twin Falls, and maybe had grandparents in Burley, a city nearby. Isidro was said to have driven a green lowrider-type pickup truck and also was a high school dropout. But the thing about Isidro is that there's a high chance he never existed, that Gina made him up because police couldn't find a single trace of him or his family. For now, the Kriegers had no idea what to do or who to turn to, and so they printed out about 30,000 flyers to hand out and did all they could, but unfortunately, the worst possible thing was yet to come. On April 15th of 1995, a badly decomposed female body was found by horseback riders in the Snake River, which was pretty close to where Gina lived, about 12 miles away. At first, while investigators were trying to figure out who it was, they said that it was a woman in her early teens to 20s. By April 17th, this body was identified as that of Regina Krieger. Her throat was slashed and she had been stabbed multiple times. The police now finally realized that they were dealing with a murder. So the residents of Twin Falls, Idaho, were on high alert, especially the parents. With this particular city being somewhat of a small city, everyone talks. This is how some crucial information would be found out by Gina's younger brother, Clifton. He just turned 13 years old 3 days before all this happened, and he heard from the grapevine that the people Gina got involved with were bug dealers who used children to deliver goods. One of them was a guy named Gilberto Rodriguez. Clifton also heard that Gina was murdered, and the reason for this was because she failed to pay up on the bugs she received from Gilberto. So, who exactly was this guy? Well, Gilberto was a 32-year-old local bug, and not much information is really known about him besides a few crucial things. He was a father, a boyfriend, a brother, an overall awful person, and he also was a part of a gang. Gilberto was someone heavily involved with every aspect of crime, and he ran around between Burley and Twin Falls, Idaho, causing a ruckus. He was selling and the good green to anyone he could find, and he was also fronting or letting people borrow bugs as long as they agreed to pay him back. This is what we can assume happened with Gina, as she was only 14 years old and didn't have a job, and that stuff was not cheap. People who were casual buyers were buying grams for $25 to $35, and occasional purchases of 8 hits, well, that was $250. Some people were buying ounces, and those were about $1,450 each time. It's unknown how much Gina owed Gilberto, but we can assume that it must have been a good amount. Well, anyways, the police started receiving phone calls about Gilberto saying that he was the one responsible for Gina's death. But when the police asked the callers how they knew, they would just hang up. This is around the time that a friend of Gilberto's called the police. His name was Cody Thompson, and he was 16 years old at the time. Why on earth was a 32-year-old hanging out with a 16-year-old? Well, that's simple. Gilberto was a weird guy and was selling bugs to children and doing them with them. And plus, he had them sell them for him. Cody was one of those kids and hung out with Gilberto pretty frequently, and he was with him the night of Gina's murder. Well, the two of them had went to a party, and Cody was on bugs at the time, but he said that he saw a body in the bathtub. Police were skeptical about this because they interviewed everyone else at the party, and nobody corroborated his story. So the police took it with a grain of salt and just assumed that Cody was a messed up kid who made everything up. By the next year, or 1996, the police were looking heavily at Gilberto, but not for the reasons you might think. After looking at his past and realizing that he's been arrested numerous times before, once in 1991, and in 1993 he was arrested for in the good green, and the rest of his record was very shady. The police had found out that Gilberto was heavily dealing bugs, and they wanted to put an end to it, so they set him up. A guy named Joe Shorty Rodriguez, who had no family relation to Gilberto, was someone that bought supply from Gilberto in the past. The police asked Joe if they could set him up for $200, to which he happily agreed. Joe went to go buy a little less than an ounce of for $1,450 on November 18th of 1996. And when he did, the police busted Gilberto and arrested him. He'd go on to have a pretty lengthy court case that would reveal some interesting things. First off, there was a lot of rumors that Gilberto was involved in the murders of two separate people. One was a guy named Blake Morgan Jr., and the other was Regina Krieger. Blake was murdered inside of his own home after masked assailants kicked down the door on April 10th of 1996 at around 3:30 a.m. These masked assailants were named Cody Shane Butcher and Jesus Diaz, Gilberto's half-brother. Cody became incredibly fond of Gilberto and looked at him as a hero, as some sort of father figure because he supplied him with his fix. Gilberto didn't like Blake Morgan Jr. because his girlfriend Angela reported to him that Blake had slapped her around and allowed another guy named Ray to threaten her. It wasn't long after this that Angela saw Jesus Diaz point a 9mm gun at Blake's head only 2 weeks before his death. On the night before the murder, or April 9th of 1996, Gilberto, Cody, and Jesus were all drinking out at a bar, and Blake just so happened to be there. Gilberto pointed Blake out to Cody and told him that he wanted him to beat up Blake right then and there. However, Gilberto then said to wait. Later into the night, the three of them continued drinking and taking. Gilberto decided to go on his own separate way, while Cody and Jesus began plotting. At about 2:30 a.m. on April 10th, the two of them went to Blake's house, kicked down his door, but found out that no one was there, and so they left. Then, about an hour later, at 3:30 a.m., they went back to Blake's house, kicked down the door again, and this time with their guns drawn. They found Blake sleeping, and so Jesus stood over top of his body. Cody and Jesus, before this, had made a pact together that if they ever killed someone, they would do it together. So Jesus counted down from 3, and the two of them then shot Blake to death. Eventually, they both would be charged for this, but Gilberto wasn't, and he wasn't even charged in connection. And regarding the case of Regina Krieger, well, officials just didn't look into him. They knew that he was and that Regina was doing that stuff, but for some dumb reason, they just couldn't put 2 and 2 together, even though multiple people called them and stated Gilberto was responsible. But while he was awaiting sentencing and for his trial to finish, in jail, an informant waiting for the Idaho DEA was attempting to get information out of him. This informant claims that Gilberto told him he had done away with 2 snitches and he could get rid of another one. Still, nothing was done. Well then, on June 26th of 1997, Gilberto was officially sentenced to 30 years in the Idaho State Penitentiary with 10 years fixed for 2 counts of delivering a controlled substance. Well then, on June 26th of 1997, Gilberto was officially sentenced to 30 years in the Idaho State Penitentiary with 10 years fixed for 2 counts of delivery of a controlled substance. I'm not sure exactly how long he served, but eventually he got out of prison. They knew that he was a dealer and that Gina was doing that stuff, but for some dumb reason, they just couldn't put two and two together, even though multiple people called them and stated Gilberto was responsible. Nothing would come from all of the claims of what he did to Gina, and so, unfortunately, for many years, her case would end up going cold. And remember earlier how a 16-year-old named Cody Thompson hung out with Gilberto? Well, Cody was keeping a secret for a very long time. A secret that would finally close this case once and for all. So in January of 2013, a sergeant named Robert Taylor, who worked for the nearby police department, decided to reopen Gina's case. After sifting through the files, he realized that there was a ton of evidence missed and evidence that just wasn't collected. Sergeant Taylor began to look into every person that was a witness or gave any tips, and the person that really struck him was Cody Thompson. Cody was now in prison and for life. From the time that he was a teenager till he was 31 years old, he was committing heinous crimes. This ranged from burglary, escape, grand theft aggravated DUI, and eluding an officer. But those didn't land him in prison for life. What did was, when he was in prison, he decided to take advantage of his cellmate. Cody was then locked up for life, and the key was thrown away on November 25th of 2009. With nothing to lose, he figured he would finally, after all these years, come clean about what actually occurred and what he really knows after Sergeant Taylor came to him. The following bit of information I'm about to tell you is what happened to Regina Krieger on the night of her death. On February 28th of 1995, Gina was at home and the time was a little bit after 11 p.m. We can assume that she was just chilling in her bed, either sleeping, watching TV, or something along those sorts. Meanwhile, Gilberto and Cody were driving around, and Gilberto said that he needs to make a stop by somebody's house. Gilberto then drove to Gina's house and parked in an alleyway nearby. Cody watched as Gilberto hopped the fence and went into this mysterious person's backyard and into their house through the back entrance. While Gilberto was inside taking Gina's life, Cody got sick and hopped the fence as well to use the bathroom. Eventually, Gilberto came out of the house with blood all over him, and he told Cody that he messed up and wanted to know if he could trust him. Cody said yeah, and without any more words, the two of them got into Gilberto's car, and then they drove around to the front of the house. Gilberto then went back inside, and moments later came back out with a body wrapped in a bloody blanket. Gilberto told Cody to help him put the body in the back of the car, to which he did. Afterwards, the two of them went to a party covered in blood and talked to a bunch of people. It was here that they also supposedly buried the knife that was used. They then left the party and drove about 12 miles away to a bridge that was located above Snake River. While on the drive, Cody asked Gilberto multiple times to drop him off somewhere or let him out of the car, but he refused. When they arrived to their destination, Gilberto pulled out a 9mm handgun and threatened Cody to help him throw Gina's body over the bridge, to which he did. Eventually, Cody was dropped off at home and he barricaded himself in his room, and his mother woke him up later in the morning because he was screaming in his sleep. He had no idea whose body he just helped dump until he saw a missing person flyer posted at a gas station, and that's when he realized that it was one of his classmates, Gina. And that's what actually occurred on that fateful night. The reason that Cody never came out with this information prior to this was because he was afraid of Gilberto and who he was associated with. And he claims that Gilberto threatened his life and his family's lives. So on February 20th of 2019, Gilberto was finally arrested for the murder of Regina Krieger and his trial was an interesting one. Because of other witnesses willing to corroborate claims made by Cody, it was easily found that Gilberto was responsible for Regina's murder. One witness named Carlos, who had known Gilberto for 30 years as a distant relative and someone who did mutual work, which was dealing firearms or illegal substances for a Mexican cartel. Gilberto talked to Carlos multiple times about Gina, and he even had a nickname for her, which was La Gina, and he said that it was unfortunate she had to be disposed of that way. Another witness came out and said that they saw Gilberto and Cody at the party bloody, and that they saw them bury the knife. With all this evidence in mind, in October of 2021, Gilberto Flores Rodriguez was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Regina Krieger. After 24 years of this case being cold, it was once and for all solved. Though it's pretty obvious the police botched this investigation from the beginning. They had their guy from the jump and had multiple people call them and tell them to look into him, and yet they really didn't. Ridiculous, but at least justice eventually got served. And Gilberto is rotting away for the rest of his life, which is for the best. Regina Lee Krieger was a young, vibrant girl who was caught up in the wrong things. Unfortunately, some of those people she got caught up with were evil and had bad intentions. I really hope wherever she is, she's resting peacefully and her parents and family are able to find some closure. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying, where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribed to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.